Adaptations. Today's media is full of them. From remakes of existing films and games, to shows and movies based off of books and comics, to sequels altering characters from previous installments, opinions are as numerous as they are varied. But how does one judge an adaptation? Adaptations are more complex than a work created from the ground up, as an adaptation is translating content to another form, and generally to another medium. This inherently creates its own problems. Some aspects are difficult or unfeasible to capture in another medium, such as adapting a novel that frequently features a character's thought processes. Movies, books, shows, and games all feature different strengths and weaknesses when crafting their stories, and as such it is the challenge of the ones doing the adapting to best convey the narrative in another way. Take books, for example. A novel can be as long as it needs to be to accomplish everything required. It is also produced by only one person, leading to all of the ideas being centralized and not spread out amongst many minds, which could muddle the creative process if communication is not concise. Books also have the advantage of engaging the consumer in a way that no other form of media can, as everything is crafted by the reader. What I mean by this is that the reader crafts their own mental image with each word they read. Any author worth their salt will describe the characters, locations, and events in such a way that the reader will not be confused, but the image in every reader's head will be slightly different from that of everyone else. This is why I do not personally listen to audiobooks. When I read a conversation between two characters, I decipher just how each character intoned their words, but an audiobook will do that for you. I personally find it to be less engaging, but that is subjective. When converting a novel to a film, however, one must deal with time constraints. A movie cannot exceed certain time parameters, making every second precious. This can lead to plot lines being condensed or cut entirely if they cannot be made to fit. Actors and actresses must also be hired and paid, in addition to the directors and all other staff that go along with it. Locations must also be traveled to and reserved for production, and CGI may need to be created. The trade-off, though, is that you can incorporate stunning visuals, spectacular performances, iconic soundtracks, and all in an easy-to-consume package for the audience. Films also do not require the same level of time investment for the viewer, as a novel can take several days to consume, depending on the speed of the reader, while a film is generally between an hour and a half and 2 hours. Being a visual medium, fine details are also clearly and succinctly relayed without chance for confusion, provided the camera work is well done. And with these challenges, we come to the divide. The first group of people are the purists. These individuals want an adaptation to follow the source material and a one-to-one representation in its new form. They believe that the source is the script, and any deviation from such is unacceptable. Many of these purists are opposed to the Lord of the Rings films, despite them hitting the major beats of the novels and keeping the majority of the content. While I can sympathize with the sentiment, this is an unreasonable expectation. As was stated previously, not all elements will translate well. Changes made in the spirit of the work, however, are acceptable. Keeping with the Lord of the Rings, we never saw Boromir's last stand in the books. We followed the perspective of Aragorn, who found him as he was dying. In the movies, we get to see him fight to defend Merry and Pippin. This change was in keeping with the books, as we get to see what Boromir is truly like, and not just what he is when the ring is affecting his mind. Not all forms of attempting to adhere to the source material are destined to end in failure, however. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe followed remarkably close to its source material, while still being internally consistent and enjoyable overall. It all depends on the work, and the changes being made, and the reason for those changes. Certain changes are not done in keeping with the work, however. Unfortunately, modern politics have forced their way into the media in which we partake, and works that do not relate to them in any way whatsoever have been tainted by them. Those in charge of these works will take steps to force their message into the adaptation, in whatever form that takes. Characters will often be race or gender swapped, have their sexual orientation changed, or be made stronger or weaker to fuel the ego of the directors, sullying the original work in the process. Those producing these corrupted forms of media have no interest in respecting the original work. They only want to push their politics. This is a horrific mutilation of the adaptation, and should not be so readily accepted. The second line of reasoning when it comes to making an adaptation is that as long as the work is internally consistent, then that is enough. If it holds up objectively, then that is all that matters. This line of reasoning is inadequate. While the work should be objectively good, that isn't enough in an adaptation. The more changes one makes to a work, the less it resembles that which it is supposed to be adapting. If you were to sit down at a restaurant and order seafood, but your server brought you chicken, would you be satisfied? It could be the best chicken on the continent, but that isn't what you ordered. Adaptations are the same way. They cannot be divorced from their source material, else they cease to be an adaptation, instead becoming their own work that latches onto the name of something previously established, like a parasite. Analyzing only the objective value of the narrative while ignoring the source entirely is akin to examining a die and reporting on how well the pips on that side were printed, ignoring the others. If Star Wars: A New Hope had been marketed and released as an adaptation of Jaws, that wouldn't have been satisfactory. It would have been a good film, but calling it an adaptation of a film about a man-eating shark would be a lie. If a work is objectively good, then it should be able to stand on its own. Take Joker, for instance. Objectively, it is a remarkable film that you should see if given the chance. As an adaptation, though, it fails miserably. If one were to take the events of the film and attempt to reconcile them with their implications, then Batman would be facing off against an elderly man, as Arthur Fleck has several decades on Bruce Wayne in this continuity. This means that interactions between Batman and the Joker couldn't happen, as the Joker would be in danger of simply breaking a hip attempting to get away. The director, Todd Phillips, was even quoted as saying they picked and chose what we liked from the source comics. This shows that the film didn't even need to be a Batman-related movie at all. There were only a few loose tie-ins that could easily have been cut or had names changed, and the entire issue would have been resolved. Joker is an objectively good film, but unfortunately, it is a terrible adaptation. This leads me to question why such changes are made at all. In the Wheel of Time show, many alterations have been made in an attempt to force real-world politics into the setting. In the first episode alone, there are several brow-raising issues. The Two Rivers, a small town in a remote locale, has many various ethnicities, which makes no sense, as almost no one new ever comes to the town, leading to their ethnicity being largely homogeneous. Almost all of the male characters are made to be weak or corrupt, while the women are shown being more competent than them in every regard. Even the lore was altered, so that there's the possibility, at least as far as the audience is aware, that a male character may have been reborn as a woman, something not possible in the source, and undermines the main plot of the series itself. These changes illustrate that faithfulness to the source material was considered an obstacle. The producers altered it to suit their desires, and in the process disrespected and slandered the work that Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson worked to create. In the remake of Mulan, the story is no longer about a girl fighting to defend her homeland and utilizing her different strengths to offset her weaknesses in comparison to the physically stronger men. Instead, she simply has magical power, negating her struggle, the need to improve, and to think outside the box. Not only is this a terrible film on its own, it is also a terrible adaptation. When making changes, keeping in the spirit of the work is paramount. It isn't about your ideas or politics. It isn't about making it for a modern audience. It isn't even about making it an objectively good work. It's about recreating the material as faithfully as possible while also making an objectively good work. Take Aragorn in The Lord of the Rings, for example. In the books, Aragorn was a much more static character. He always intended to be king, and while he was a good man and a strong leader, very little about him changed from his introduction in The Fellowship of the Ring to his last appearance in Return of the King. In the films, he has to confront the choice of whether he should be king. He keeps the vast majority of his character traits, and by the end accepts the role of king, aligning with his book counterpart, and giving him more depth. In the novel Halo: The Flood, the events from Halo Combat Evolved are recounted in remarkable detail, but the details of what was happening on Installation 04 outside of what the Master Chief was doing are fleshed out, and more context is provided for the events of the game. These changes show that those in charge cared about what they were producing, and weren't attempting to push their politics or steal the name of an established franchise for relevance. They put their effort into making sure to capture the essence of the work they were adapting, and changes were made as they were needed, not out of a desire to change the work into something they preferred. The final tangential topic that can be associated with adaptation are the additions of sequels and prequels to a work. characters or world building can sometimes change drastically from what they were established to be. Take the Terminator films, for instance. In the first movie, it's established that only the T-800 and Kyle Reese could have traveled back in time, as humanity had beaten Skynet, but the machines had sent back one Terminator unit, and Kyle followed it through before humanity destroyed the time machine. It's also established that only living tissue, or something covered in living tissue, can travel back through time. Yet somehow a T-1000 is also sent back in time by Skynet to kill John Connor after he was born, and a reprogrammed T-800 is also sent back to defend him. This shouldn't have been possible, as Skynet was destroyed, and the time machine along with it. Nobody could have come back, be they human or otherwise. The T-1000 also breaks the rule of only living tissue passing through time, as it is only composed of liquid metal. While Terminator 2 is an amazing film, it breaks the rules previously established by Terminator 1 and creates a gaping plot hole. We can also examine Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story. In the second film, Buzz is established to be remarkably intelligent, planning and successfully executing their operation to rescue Woody. This intelligence is continued in the third film, but is strangely contradicted in the fourth film, and now Buzz is a blundering idiot. Woody also lost his core trait of loyalty in the fourth film, abandoning the child he belonged to. I've spoken ill of the Star Wars sequels before, and could continue to do so, but the prequels also have the issue of creating inconsistencies. The technology of the separatist droids was remarkably advanced, and yet none are deployed against the rebels in the later OT. Why would Palpatine not keep such useful machines around, which would work wonders to supplement their existing forces? While not adaptations, prequels and sequels must also fall in line with the work that came before, and the spirit of said work. Terminator 2 breaks the rules of time travel and goes against the sequence of events described in the first film, but once the film is underway, it maintains the integrity of the characters and is a fantastic film. Toy Story 4 fails in both of these regards, however. In summary, adaptations are a complicated matter, as not only must they be objectively good on their own, but they must also remain as close to their source material as they can. If one wished to deviate drastically from said material, then there's no shame in making a new IP inspired by the previous work. After all, if it is both objectively good and significantly different from the source, then one has constructed something that can stand on its own and become a work worthy of bearing its own name. I'd like to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen to me, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.